Organizations working against modern slavery estimate that every year $127 billion of merchandise is produced in slavery conditions in the field of fashion alone. In Mauritania, for example, you can buy a slave for $15. There are different types of slaves around the world nowadays. There are workers that are employed under forced labor by organizations, some say by governments. Now, when you hear this, you can't believe it. It sounds crazy. We're living in the 21st century, and there are still a few millions of slaves around the world. How can we allow such a deviation in the 21st century? What does it matter if it's the 21st century or not? It's the same today. Man's nature did not change, it only got worse. Changes aren't for the better, but to our detriment. In Mauritania or in other places, there's this phenomenon where a person is released from slavery. He becomes a free person. After some time, he comes to the conclusion that it doesn't work for him, and he goes back to being a slave. I can understand it. Tell me, how are we different than those slaves? Am I not a slave to the country, to the government, to the human society that I'm a part of that controls me, that determines things for me? As a metaphor, you can relate to yourself as a modern slave, but obviously it's a metaphor, because at any given moment you can get up and do whatever you want with your life. It depends on what do you mean by slave. There's a person who belongs to another person. It's property. It's like buying a car. A person is someone else's property. And you have to think about him like you think about your car. That it won't break down, that it'll get serviced on time and everything. It's a serious matter. It's a person that is your property. And therefore, after he's being taken care of, probably he's being taken care of, he goes back to that same landlord, even though that he's free now, and he says, I want to go back into that same slavery. So eventually a person does the math, where am I better off? Of course. And a slave does the math and says, it's better for me to be a slave. It just tells us how much we don't understand what slavery is, and we didn't come out of it yet. Out of what? We don't want to be a free nation. We don't want to be free? No. Who doesn't? No one does. What do you mean? I mean that everyone's willing to sell themselves for a certain price. Everyone has a price, that's what you're saying? Of course. Of course. Evolutionally wise, are we not supposed to develop, to free ourselves from slavery? It's not about that at all. So, how do we come out of the concept of being slaves? It's something that exists in the slave, not in the landlord. What has to develop in the slave? That the slave doesn't want to stay a slave, but that he wants to come out of slavery. And then he has to think, where am I a slave and where am I not? Maybe I'm not a slave to this landlord, but maybe I'm a slave to my desire to receive pleasure. You're saying that something has to evolve in our perception in order for us to set ourselves free from being slaves? You said that I have to ask, what am I enslaved to? Your evil inclination, your ego, your desire to receive pleasure. How does my ego enslave me? Because you want to enjoy life as much as possible, to pay as little as possible, and to get as much as possible. So you do the math that it's worthwhile paying what the landlord's demanding of me. But I belong to him, and he takes care of me. I'm ill, he cares for me. I'm tired, he cares for me. I'm hungry, he takes care of me, or even finds me a wife. He does everything. So why do I have to think about all of these things? I just know how to do what he needs me to do. The way you see it, what is a free person? Free of his ego, of his desire to receive pleasure from life, even in the tiniest way. So he doesn't want to enjoy anything. He's kind of a monk. Is a monk free? A monk is not free because he has decided that he is forcefully keeping his monkhood, and a Kabbalist aspires to reach a state where he wants to be free of his egoistic desire in order to sustain its opposite form of bestowal and love toward others, and through that, to the Creator. A person who feels love towards others, he's free? This what you're saying? Yes. He freed himself of what? He freed himself of his ego and wants only to bestow. And what does he get out of it? That he's like the creator. And what does that give him? He lives in a world that is utterly good. This is the key to a perfect life? Yes. Why? Because he doesn't feel that he's lacking anything personally, but he exchanged his entire particular desire for the deficiency of another. He's concerned with fulfilling the other person? Yes. And that makes him free? Yes. It enslaves him to everyone. True, but not to himself. So not to himself, this is what it's about? Yes? Why? What is this open to him? Love for others. Care for others. You're free of your ego.